Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leonard Tihing. I'm from the University of Technology, Sydney. I'm here to present our preliminary results with our work on part trials of urine-based fertilizer using our Orval fertilizer from UTS. This is in collaboration with our partner, the City of Sydney. With us here is Neil Palagadaria, our partner investigator from the City of Sydney. So this is the team from the City of Sydney with Ishita, William, and Luke, and also from UTS, myself, Professor Sean, Dr. Ibrahim, and our PhD student who's helping us with this work. So basically, the main objective of this project was to investigate the viability and compare the performance of our urine-based fertilizer, which is the Orval, which is I think is in the batch 2 or the generation 2 of the Orval fertilizer, and compare it with the usual commercial fertilizer that has been used in the city of Sydney or Parklands. And we're looking at a test site in Victoria Park. So if it's about 5 minutes walk from here, if you go to Broadway Shopping Center, there's a park there, and that's our park trial site. And if you look at this over here, so these are two sites that we have for our trial site location. So these two are identical sites nearby the parking area. So we chose these two sites because of its exposure to sunlight. It's at least very more or less flat land. We have some locations that was presented to us by the city, but we have chosen these two areas. And we have conducted experiments for both in identical situations. And I'm going to give you some of the experimental parameters that we have conducted. So basically, from most of the urban parklands, the grass type is Kikuyu grass. This is a usual case of grass that has a good growth, especially in summertime and throughout the year, basically. But at winter time, this kind of grass kind of a bit of stagnant. It's not a slow growth during winter time. We have, in terms of our tests, we did some visual inspection. We did some grass yield of the grasses, and of course we have recorded some of the weather data. So in terms of the actual park trial test, we have a bit of limited access, not the access, but the way of we can do the experiments because it's in a public space. And so we just considered some of the initial aspects for the conduct of experiments. So we have conducted our experiments with 4 treatments here. So basically, we have our control without any fertilizer. So we have also the T1, which is the one with using our commercial fertilizer. The one is a match place first of MPO region. This is a solid type of fertilizer that has been used by the City of Sydney in their parks. And then the treatment 2 is an Orval fertilizer, and we have diluted this one, and I will show you later on. And we have also tested a little bit of a different type of soil food coming from the City of Sydney as well, just to have a bit of comparison and the combination of the Orval plus the soil food. So we conducted our, in each plot, we have 4 replicates. So as you can see, we have these 20 blocks of 1 square meter of plots, and there are 4 replicates for each treatment case. And we can show you here how it looks like. So we put a bit of a pigtail fence on the location of the site, and we put some sort of bordered pegs to border the different types of the area of our test for each block, and then we took some photos on a weekly basis as well as getting the yields on a regular basis as well. So basically, the composition of the solid form of the commercial fertilizer is this. This is a 2818 commercial fertilizer. It's a solid form. And this is the liquid form of our Orval fertilizer. So there's a difference in terms of concentration, but we have calculated the amount. 5 minutes, okay, that's quick, yeah. All right. So this is the kind of fertilizer that we have inputted there, and we have also the Orval fertilizer. We put some 25 mils of fertilizer together with 9 liters of water, and also the other soil food is also shown here, and then we watered at the start of our trials. The main thing about this one is that the commercial fertilizer is a solid form, so We applied the commercial fertilizer at one time at the start of the experiment. However, on the liquid type, we had to stagger it because we cannot put everything at one time because there's going to be a lot of wastage. So we have to do it in a regular basis in different weeks to just input the right amount of fertilizer, and we have recorded as well the rains as well as the winter conditions for this. We took photos on a weekly basis just to show the comparison about what's going on in terms of growth. It's not easily identified here, but we do the visual inspection. This is for the start of the experiment, and this is the commercial fertilizer. So basically, everything started in a similar state. And then after week 3, we see, of course, at the start, we have to remove all the grasses by manually. We didn't use any weed killer at this point in stage. We have to just manually remove some of the grasses, and then we found some weeds growing as well for all the blocks in week 3. We could see that the commercial fertilizers has a more green color compared to the other ones, perhaps because this is the more concentrated one when we applied it at the start of the experiment. And then after weeks 6 and 8, we could see some differences there. But the thing is, the yield is not as we expected in terms of the growth. Is quite slow because of the winter season, but we still have some yield produced during that time, and we're still continuing at this point in time. So I will go expect a number of different data points later on in these weeks. Initially, this is our result for now. We expected this one definitely because this is the control, and this is the commercial fertilizer, and these are the Orval and the other treated approaches that we have. This is just one data point, but our expectation for this is that commercial fertilizer will have a better yield at this point in time because we applied the whole of the amount at the start of the experiment. And so the main basis for us is not about the weekly yield, but more of the cumulative yield until the end of the test. So we can see the whole yield once we have finished all the amount of urine fertilizer that we will have to apply throughout the many weeks later on. So this is just an expectation, and we're still analyzing some of our recent results on the yield as well. And we're going to analyze some other important tests later on for soil analysis as well as we go along. But so far, this trial, of course, as you know, in a park trial is a little bit less controlled in terms of experimental conditions because it's open to the public, but we try to control it as much as we can. It showed that the T1 or the treatment 1 with commercial fertilizers had better result. We expected that, and after a few weeks, we have to put on the cumulative results for the yield as well for the Orval fertilizer. One of the main issue here is the difference in types of the fertilizer. We have a solid versus a liquid type, so probably in the near future we have to consider that to have a similar form of fertilizer to compare with. But as a start, we just did what the city of Sydney is currently doing in their parklands, which is using this commercial fertilizer, and in comparison with our own liquid Orval fertilizer. It's a little bit challenge to get a good yield because of the winter season, but we have to repeat this one in the summer season as well. For this test, the weeds are not controlled for this test, so every time we do the mowing, we have to remove the weeds manually. It's not easy to remove the weeds manually, but it took some hours to do that, but at least we have more or less gotten a good yield result for this. And these are the types of weeds that we have observed in the test. So in the future work, of course, we're currently continuing our car report trials in Victoria Park, and we'll be testing a similar type of fertilizer probably to have a better comparison. And we are considering of doing some plot tests as well to different types of grass so that we can have a more controlled condition and see how we go with there. And of course, we'll continue with our summer park type trials and compare this one with our winter one. So far, that's our initial preliminary results for this time. We thank the City of Sydney through Neil Plegadera here for the support, and of course from the NiCE Hub and the UTS team. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Leonard. So next up we have Dana Cardell with the title of the talk being NiCE Markets and Perceptions code. Circular markets for a thriving circular nutrient value chain, a market feasibility and perception study.
Thank you very much. The most exciting session of the day, no doubt. Thinking about egg juice. So our topic is on really thinking about overcoming these market barriers for a thriving circular nutrient value chain. So focusing on a market feasibility and perception study. And as Jason mentioned this morning, involved in this one is myself, Jason. We're very lucky to now have Kerry Tozer on board as our PhD student. We haven't signed off on the final paperwork, so we haven't announced it, but yes, she will be the star of this project. And of course, we have industry partner Gary Leeson from OCP Yates partnering with us on this. So I just want to very quickly step back and remind us about what's the drivers behind this particular project, because as we've heard today in the room, there's a lot of different entry points and perspectives and value propositions. We're coming from different places. So for this particular piece of work, it's driven by, from a fertiliser perspective, that the way we currently source and use fertilisers today is highly unsustainable for a diverse range of reasons and risks. Not least of all the greenhouse gas burden of nitrogen-based fertilisers, the geopolitics around our phosphorus sources globally, the fact that nitrogen and phosphorus are both some of the most inefficient value chains in the world, and of course the waste burden and the increasing costs. So we know this is presenting a huge risk for food security, for the environment and for climate. If we instead think about investing in renewable fertilisers sourced from local sustainable sources in a circular nutrient economy, there are equally a vast amount of sustainability benefits. And these range from food and fertiliser security benefits. I won't have time to go through all of it, and we know a lot of these, but I was thinking, Syed and Gam, how can we think about valuing some of these? How do we value the avoided risk? If we diversify and have domestic sources of local renewable fertilisers rather than relying on risky import markets, how do we value that in an economic assessment? I'd love to think more about that because it's so important. We know there's a whole bunch of water-related benefits, all the climate benefits. I mean, I didn't even know myself until relatively recently that the production and use of nitrogen fertilisers can contribute up to 5% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. That is huge. And so we need to be talking about that more in these conversations, I think, that amount. And a whole bunch of other environmental benefits, and also thinking about local employment and manufacturing, which of course is big in this country at the moment. So the big question we've all been talking about today, what's stopping all of this from happening at scale? Because we know that transitioning to a thriving nutrient value chain, circular nutrient value chain, requires the establishment of new markets, new products, reverse logistics, integration between value chain actors. And the fertiliser industry, for example, need reliable supply chains of uncontaminated raw materials, whether that's urine or food waste or manure or whatnot, and in high volume and on demand. And what we've been hearing from the fertiliser industry stakeholders across the world over the past decade or so is a really similar story. And some of you might remember these anecdotes from me talking from last time, that in Malawi, for example, the only fertiliser manufacturer, we wanted to understand why they weren't interested in using human excreta as a feedstock. And he said, oh, all the sanitation NGOs come to him with a bit of poo here and there. And he says, don't talk to me about a few tonnes of excreta. Come back when you've got 100 tonnes a day, and then we'll talk business. So, okay, there's an economy of scale issue here we need to overcome. In Sydney, frustrated waste farmers were telling us that the waste contractors are dumping the compost, free compost at our farm gate and wondering why we aren't using it. We don't have the machinery to spread it, so it's in the wrong form. And in Sri Lanka, fertiliser producers were telling us that using human excreta, we're not worried about the ick factor, that's just a marketing issue. Okay, so let's invest in that marketing. So what this is all telling us, what's happening there, is that we need to begin at the end. So instead of waste managers spending millions of dollars and many years recovering nutrients and using fantastic technological innovations and then searching for a market as an afterthought, we need to be talking upfront to farmers and other end users in the value chain. I'm going to move faster. Hence our project on overcoming the barriers. So at this point, I'm just very quickly going to introduce Kerry Tozer, who I mentioned is our new student, because we were specifically looking for someone who had supply chain expertise and with an environmental ethic, and we think we found that in Kerry.
Let's hope so. As Dave mentioned, I have a lot of experience in supply chain across many different industries. And normally in supply chain, you think transport, distribution. Yes, I have experience in all of those areas, but I actually started my experience through procurement and sourcing, and then working from procurement and sourcing to supply planning, demand planning, and then overall planning of the entire balancing act, if you want to call it that. So if we think about, as Dana was saying, looking at what do the end users need, how do we then balance what end users need back up to what producers can actually make and what is actually possible? Because that's the only way we're going to find a balance and actually get some kind of circular flow happening.
Great. Yeah,
I'll leave it there.
And next time we talk on this project, we will definitely be hearing Kerry instead of myself up here speaking. So one of the theoretical principles that's going to underpin this project is design thinking, specifically design for circular use and user-centred circular design, because this is about creating products and services that contribute to the competitiveness of circular offerings over linear consumption. And this could be as simple as being mindful of making it easier and more attractive to transport materials and products between the source, like the toilet or the compost bin, to the final end user. And the Circular Australia's chief circular designer reminds us that we need a frictionless experience for our users and value chain actors. So let's keep that human desirability in our minds when we're designing, as you can see in that diagram. And again, that a circular transition requires, of course, changes in user behaviours, but we have to acknowledge that acting in a circular way is often challenging, more cumbersome, time-consuming, can be more expensive. So we need to design this out up front, because we know in a circular economy that a large part, one of the biggest leverage points is actually in the design phase, redesigning. So let's focus on that. So we need to be what they call empathising with users to develop solutions that truly resonate with the target audience. So I won't go through that, it's just a general design process or methodology, but the important thing is the blue one there up front, the empathising. And so how that will materialise in our project will be around focus groups and interviews with farmers and other fertiliser users and value chain stakeholders in collaboration with Gary at OCP. The design approach also asks us to, how can we think about redesigning our circular business? So we need to start by identifying the impact hotspots in the existing linear fertiliser value chain from extraction through to end use. Won't go through all of these because I think I'm going to be running out of time, but there's a lot of pointy questions that we can ask, like, does it need to be made in the first place, and can it be a service instead? Well, we know we cannot grow food, we cannot produce any kind of crops without fertilisers, but actually we can supplement that with a service provision model. And ask me about this in the Q&A, because I've got a really nice business case from a Sydney company. So lots of other questions at different stages that we need to be thinking about, including, can it be lighter? Yes, of course. We know a lot of organic material is very low in concentration. There's been a lot of great discussion today moving towards how we can concentrate those nutrients and what else can it be used for. There's so many things I'd like to say here, but I can't because of this 10-minute limit. I apologise. So I'll just move on to very quickly thinking about redesigning the circular nutrient value chain. Jason showed you this image earlier. Some of the questions we'll be asking about are, who are my target end users? What are their values? What drives them? Is it just economics, or do they have other climate or environmental values that are driving them? What do they currently use? What's the price point at which they might shift? Who's going to distribute and sell my products? Is it going on Bunnings shelves or supermarkets, or directly to fertiliser companies as an intermediate product? Thinking about what is my value proposition, and we could get into that a lot more, I think. Do I have a competitive edge, etc. And then again on the supply side, thinking about sufficient supply of raw materials. Where are they located? Is transport and storage viable? What about the quality? Are new collection and treatment systems required? New contracts, etc. Just my final slide here is about readiness. So apologies I'm talking so fast. So we talk a lot about technology readiness levels. We all know about that. But we want to expand that to think about the readiness of the whole system. So assess transformational readiness. So thinking about that diagram as TRL, obviously. We want to think about as stakeholders ready to transform. What does that look like? Specifically our end users. Is the market ready to transform? Are the policies and political will in place? Who will finance and manage the whole circular value chain? And here's a nice little example of 4 dimensions of a market entry readiness, which in addition to technology readiness shows market readiness, management readiness and commercial readiness. And I think we can expand that even further. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Dana. Next speaker is me.
Who's going to give you the talk?
Feel free to throw something if I go over. First, I want to introduce you to the team from Western Sydney Uni. So myself, Neeraj Yadav, who's a PhD student who started with us in April. Hangxia Yu, who's a PhD student who's visiting us, who's been visiting us this year. And Jason Reynolds, who's a geochemist. I'm a soil biologist. I'm going to be talking to you a bit today about some of the research that we've been doing, including some of our findings. But first, I'll just introduce the talk by. So a lot of the soils that we think about when we're thinking about using fertilizers for food production, they're soils like this. So they're really productive. They've got really thick organic layer, and then they're really well drained in the profile below. So these are fertile soils, and they're very responsive to fertilizers that are added. There are issues associated with them, though. If they're well drained, you can end up with leaching, modification, denitrification. These are things that have been discussed already today, and there's some research needs around that. But there's also other types of soils. So this is a soil from nearby in Western Sydney, near Penrith. It's a really difficult soil to work with. It's at the Nepean Lakes area, and they've really struggled to plant trees into this soil. They've got a really low success rate associated with it. And so one of those issues is associated with this really, it's really clayey. It's really difficult for those plants to grow. They get waterlogged quite easily, and so forth. And so I think there's an opportunity here associated with some of these products that the hub is producing, where we can potentially use some of these products in order to release some of these soils from these constraints, allow them to recover. So it's not just about food production, it's about turning some of our green spaces into environments that are perhaps more desirable for growing trees, growing some horticultural plants as well. Here's another example. So this is a soil at Sydney Science Park. It's horrible. It's and compacted. It's really difficult to get stuff to grow in it. And they're very interested in alleviating constraints associated with nutrients and just other constraints. So just some of the things that we've been doing, I'm going to race through these things pretty quickly. This is largely work that Neeraj and Hangxia have been doing. We've done a little bit of analysis. We're working with Yerval. I don't know what batch we're working with. And so we've done a little bit of analysis of it, and we're particularly keen in how the characteristics of the fertilizer influence the interactions between the soil that the fertilizer is added to and the nutrients that are within that fertilizer. So I'll show you a result of one of the experiments that Neeraj did. And then we're also doing some measuring plant and soil responses in some pot experiments at this point. in response to the fertilizer. Here's one of the bottles that we're working with. When we analyzed the fertilizer, we found that by the time that it got to us, there were some differences associated with some of the elements. Largely, it was most of the things were higher than what it said on the bottle. Sulfur was a bit lower. A few things. So the concentration of total dissolved salts was actually quite a bit higher in it. And the pH was very, very low. And so this is something that this is by the time it got to us. So this is a constraint associated with the product that probably needs to be dealt with. One thing that we measured in it was silicon. So we were a little surprised that there was so much silicon in it, but I guess we shouldn't be that surprised because silicon's an element that's present in a lot of plants, and most of it gets excreted. We don't really absorb very much of it at all. And this is a potential opportunity. So there's a lot of interest in silicon-based fertilizers here in Australia. So that's something that we could perhaps talk about. I've got a slide here that basically the take home from this, you already know, is that we have to balance when we're using this in whatever context we're using it in, where we're trying to improve the fertility of soils and improve plant growth. We have to consider both the availability of the nutrients to plants, but also we have to balance the losses associated with greenhouse gases and leaching. And particularly for liquid fertilizers, one thing that we do want to do is we want to make sure that those nutrients are staying within the soil. They might not all immediately be taken up by the plants. And in cases like that, we want to encourage a healthy soil in order for those nutrients to be immobilized for brief periods of time within the soil biology, and then to release those nutrients slowly through time. And that's something that varies a lot from soil to soil. Here's an experiment where we're just looking at the behavior of when we incubate different types of soil with the fertilizer, and we get very, very different results. So the dashed line shows you basically how much phosphorus is present within the soil solution without adding any fertilizer to it, without adding any nutrient to it. And what we find for these four soils that we used, collected from a few different places around Western Sydney, when we just add orthophosphate, which is the green one, it basically, that fertilizer gets physically bound and chemically bound to the soil for that day or so that it spends incubating with the soil. But the urval, the phosphorus in the urval, depending on what soil you do, changes a lot, the amount of phosphorus within solution. So for our two soils in Richmond, which are these very sandy soils, they've got very low levels of organic matter. That phosphorus availability shoots way up, okay? There's very little phosphate buffering capacity within these soils. And so the availability of it is very high. Potentially there's an issue there with leaching, and so we want to make sure that there's a lot of roots and a lot of other microorganisms in there that can take it up. With our soil from Picton, so this is a pasture system, has low phosphorus availability, but it's got a really high amount of organic matter. And that phosphorus that's in the urval is binding very quickly. It's got a very, very low phosphorus availability. And so just the main take-home message is that how we need to think about how we need to understand how these fertilizers are interacting with these different soil types to understand how plants are going to respond. I'll just kind of very briefly go over the pot experiment that Hangsha and Niraj are currently doing. So this just some photos of it. We've got some gas chambers that we're using to sample greenhouse gases from these pots. There's Hankshia adding some fertilizer solution to the pots. Just a few images associated with it at a very, very high level. So we used a mineral fertilizer that we dissolved before adding it, and then we've got Yerval, and we added it at 2 rates, okay? So, and then we grew 2 different plants associated with these. So these are both pasture species. And we used rates that are associated with pasture fertilizer application rates, including one that's very high. We kind of wanted to push the system. It's within the range of what farmers might use, but it's a very high rate. What we found at this lower rate was that the plants generally responded very well to it. You can't really see it in this image with the lights on in the room, but these grasses are very, very green. They absorbed a lot of nitrogen to the point that we actually ended up with an aphid problem. The aphids just loved it. However, when we got to the high rate, the plants with the mineral fertilizer were doing just fine, not so much. We don't know if this was a pH issue. We don't know if it was a salinity issue. We don't know if it was a nitrogen toxicity issue. This is something that we need to learn. Anyway, I've used up my time. I'll just leave it there. Again, the main takeaway here is that there's a lot that we don't know about how these fertilizers interact with soil. There's a lot that we can learn, including ways in which we might modify the product. Hopefully we can interact to find out how we can do that. Additional amendments. Are there things that we can add? We could add gypsum to raise the pH, but then we're just digging stuff out of the ground. That's not really what we're aiming for here. So are there other products that we could recycle, recover, and apply that could help these things work well? Anyway, I'll leave it there, and we'll move on to our next talk. So that is Ibrahim Al-Salabi. Thank you. So Ibrahim and Juan Lucas is going to join us as well. Juan Lucas, and they're going to talk on applying and studying the effect of human urine nutrient solutions on plant growth.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thanks Jeff for introducing us. So, everybody knows me from my health management role. No one knows me from working in horticulture or agriculture. But I've been doing that for 20 years, so I've got other experience. So here, one is joining me from the Botanic Garden. So he took the role of PI there after I left. And then we're still working with the Botanic Garden on testing herbal on different species. So the collaboration between the Botanic Garden and ETS dates back to probably 2018 and 2019 on testing herbal since the beginning. And then we've tested a few crops, and then this year we're testing spearmint. Our research project falls under the 4th theme of the NiCE hub, which is fertilizers end use, because the Botanic Garden basically are end users, and they purchase fertilizer to apply it in the nursery or on turf. So we're trying to actually fulfill that theme in the hub KPIs that we are trying to achieve in that or contribute to are basically publications, industry visits, number of government, community briefing, and then journal articles and media releases. So we so far are on track for 2023, and then we are actually working harder to get things done quicker. But there's so many changes in the Botanic Gardens, it's a bit challenging to keep everything on track. So this study was basically very simple, very straightforward, not too complicated because we had some budget restrictions and space restrictions. So our target was to basically study the effect of the fertilizer compared to a commercial one on the growth of spearmint. And then we tested two fertilizers, urban and commercial one, and then 3 different potting media. And of course, we wanted to investigate if there's any other inhibitions happening while we are applying the urban fertilizer. The study site is the Botanic Garden Nursery, top yard section, which is this section here. So it's between the calyx and then the Sydney Fernery. It's a north-facing site where we got sun in winter around 4 to 6 hours, depending on the sunny days, because the sun goes behind the towers of the city. So it's a very short photo period every day. The experimental layout was a 2x3 factorial that we've selected with 2 different fertilizer treatments and 3 potting medias. And then we've done 5 replications per combination of treatments. We've applied both fertilizers, so we have here the jerry cans that we've prepared the fertilizer in. That's herbal, and then that's the calcium magnesium grower. So we applied 200 ppm on a weekly basis at 200 milliliters per plant. And then that's the experimental layout. So the location was on a bench. It's around 800 mil wide and probably 6 meter long. So I'll pass to Juan to talk about the results that we got.
This study was conducted over a span of 6 weeks, and after we collect the data, we obtain the following results. In this first graph, we can see the average height of plant based on the applied treatment. The 3 groups on the left represent plant treated with urine fertilizer, while the 3 groups on the right correspond to plant treated with commercial fertilizer. Between these groups, each bar represents the weekly average height for each treatment. A trend of greater growth is noted in all treatments where commercial fertilizer was used. Among these, the treatment called CMB, which consisted of a vermiculite substrate, stood out. Another observed aspect is that the variability between treatments using commercial fertilizer is higher than in those treatments with urine fertilizer. It is highlighted that treatment under urine fertilization yielded more homogeneous results. In this second graph, the total number of stocks per treatment is displayed. This process was also carried out and analyzed over 6 weeks. We can see the same categories and distinction between urine fertilizer, the first 3 groups, and the commercial fertilizer, the next 3 groups. It's a greater indication in the number of stock per plant when commercial fertilizer is applied. Again, the most significant growth and stock production trends are observed in the CMB treatment. In this case, the least development stock per treatment is in the UPP, that in the middle. In this last graph, the average weight of biomass per treatment was analyzed, and the blue bars are the weight of the wet biomass, and the orange bar are the weight of dry biomass. Again, it's observed that the highest weights were recorded in all treatments where commercial fertilizer was applied, with CMB being the most notable in this category. And in relationship to the data obtained, we can affirm that treatment with urine fertilizer yielded lower values than treatment where commercial fertilizer was applied. Secondly, the CMB treatment was proven to be the best combination of fertilizer and substrate for the development and growth of mint plants. And on the other hand, the UPP treatment showed unfavorable results when analyzing the growth of mints. Lastly, some plants exhibited poor growth due to the presence of some pathogens, such as mint rust and Puccinia mentale. Nonetheless, further data analysis could be conducted to verify the significant difference between treatments. And to conclude this presentation, we would like to thank the Australian Research Council for their help throughout this project. We would also like to thank Johnson and Jay Xian from UTAs and FEIT for providing the urine fertilizer. And last but not least, to the Royal Botanic Garden of Sydney for their support, especially to Randy Singh's team. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys. Next up, we've got Bernadette McCabe talking about evaluation and demonstration of U-Gold and URAL efficiency in field trials.
Thanks, Jeff. Lucky last. I'm still standing. So this session, you've heard a lot about the various approaches to agronomic assessment. What we're doing at the University of Southern Queensland, I guess, is complementing a lot of what's already been said. But we are going to be looking at, I guess, a comparison between UGOLD and also Herbal, and particularly using a set of standardised procedures that we've done, both in the glasshouse and also the field trials. If I'm feeling like I'm a little bit tired, I really am right now. Just like to make mention to our team at the University of Southern Queensland. I'm leading the work, but also acknowledging the expertise of Dr. Dio Antill, who is our adjunct research fellow, and also with CSIRO Division Agriculture and Food, and good to see you, Catherine. Catherine is one of Dio's colleagues. And Dr. Serge Marchuk, and also Xiangmi Li, who is basically our PhD student who we're recruiting, or have recruited, commencing basically now. So it's been really timely to have these discussions to understand how we can develop a project which actually does complement on all this great work that others are doing. But if I could just go over some of the project objectives. The first one, what we call work package one, is the essential project for which we were put into the project on, and that was assessing urine-derived fertilisers. When we were bringing together that project, we also had the opportunity to bring in other industry partners, and it was through my previous interaction with both Pyrocal and also Logan City Council that we were able to bring these guys into the fold to make them, I guess, looking at number 1 and 2. And want to acknowledge our star in the room, and thanks for that, Joe. I was actually part of that whole behind the scenes, and it was very interesting, wasn't it? How they got you to actually say things. I know exactly how they were doing it, and it was completely like, yeah.
Left field.
It was not even related, I know. So who was also featured was Kay Elstiner, who's my PhD student, who's been doing, who's in her final year. She's actually in her write-up now for the biosolids throughout biochar work, which is an unrelated project, but is certainly going to inform a lot of important work, which is otherwise untold at the moment for that area. So we are basically looking at evaluating the proposed formulations and product format for the urine-derived fertilisers, but essentially getting what we call a fertiliser replacement value, an FRV, which was the basis behind how we interacted with you before on a former project, particularly biosolids. And getting a value is really important to understand your markets. And we talked about, you know, the economics behind it. So it's all well and good to try to work out, you know, does it yield work, you know, for the spearmint or something else, but it's about what's the composition and how does it compare to synthetic fertiliser, and basically what's the monetary value. Because once you've got that sort of as a standard approach, then you can go on to assess really what is the best application. With the Logan, you know, it's a different type of problem we've got here, is that you've got biosolids with a lot of heavy metals, but under thermal processing, those heavy metals are still there. So you've got to wonder, well, what's going to happen long term? Yes, they get caught up in this matrix, but it's like, you know, what happens in the long term? So we've done some work around leaching, NiCE leaching work, which we did actually even prior to this project. That was actually funded by Pyrocal, and that actually with some really good foundation results that went into developing end of waste code, which is in draft format now. So some of the generic things that we're doing is, as I said, looking at the agricultural requirements, looking at the chemical physical specifications similar to what others are doing, and looking at some proposed formulations. Whether we get to the point of guidelines, probably not for Ervil, but certainly for Ervil Ugol, because it's such early days, but definitely what we're trying to work with towards the biochar product is to understand what's the safe use, and also other markets. So for instance, the biochar can be a good market for mine rehab, for instance. It's another sort of area that we're looking at. So some of our facilities, that's our glass house, which you saw on the little, you saw pale looking at all those various things. That's our trials that we use. We use ryegrass as our model crop. It's a good crop, it grows very quickly. What we do is so for instance, that biochar work that Pale did is actually a 12-month long, and that's when you get a lot of data and you get a lot of understanding around nutrient cycling and also biomass yield, and also uptake of any contaminants into biomass. We're all good. But ryegrass, basically you can get multiple cuts after growing for 1 month, and so therefore you can get an understanding. The other left-hand side is our leaching experiments, where we are continually putting, you know, water through there and understanding what's the mobility of, say, heavy metals. I mean, that was a particularly important experiment we did for the biochar work. So you can see how quickly the ryegrass grows, and you can cut them at there, and you can measure that relationship between N and P. And the next one actually is our field trial, what we're doing for the biochar. That was actually taken only about a month ago, and you'll see those little white flags. You can see there is actually assessment where we have the Logan biochar applied. Also biosolids there, so we're going to actually have a look at how that grows, because I'm not sure if you remember, Matthew, about the difference now biosolids wheat compared to the control was a massive, because they're P limited soils and there's lots of P in biosolids. So you know, the field trials that we'll be doing for the urine-derived fertilisers will be very different to this, obviously, because we'll be looking at it in very small scale, but still we'll be doing it in a very controlled way. So I take your point around having a parkland might not be, but what we're doing is really bringing it back down to that sort of semi-controlled, it's not hot trials, but it goes to a point where we can water it, we can control in a way so we can get an understanding at least of what it might behave as when you go to the next step. So that's finishes my presentation. That's just my team who was standing in the wheat there. That was actually the biosolids work we did a few years ago. So thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, Bernadette. Do you want to just stay up? Grab the chair. If all the speakers from this session could come up, please. The program says future plan and closing remarks, but we will have just a few time for some questions. And I know that you've all noticed the booze in that corner of the room. We won't keep you from that too long, but please just try to keep your attention focused up here for now. So who would like to ask the first question?
So I'll address my first question to you. So looking at those graphs where you added phosphorus to the soils, and there were two data points for each graph. So one, if I understood correctly, represents the unavailable phosphorus, and one is the
The green one was if we're just adding orthophosphate, so potassium hypophosphate. So just chemically, what happens to the same concentration of phosphorus when we add it to the soil versus when we add that phosphorus in the form of urval. Yeah.
Okay.
That the other point was the urval.
Okay. Now it makes more sense. Okay.
Actually, we're over here. You had a question?
Yeah. I have a question for you, Greg, and for Juan. Looking at your data, I was curious about the data that show you regarding the stem length. Now, if we compare the three different soils and also the commercial and the fertilizer and then the UL, if you look at the first week, now I understand there is no statistical assessment of the differences and so on, but if you look at the first week, those values are very similar. It's from the second week that actually the commercial fertilizer takes the lead.
Yeah.
So do you think there is a particular reason why from like the second and third week that the gap increases, or?
When we start the experiment, we cut the plants all to the same level at 100 mils, and then we start measuring whatever comes over those 100 mils.
Okay.
So to standardize that, we start measuring from that point. The reason why we have more in the commercial fertilizer, because commercial fertilizers are complete. They have all the nutrients that probably the mint needs. We all know that herbal is not a complete fertilizer. You have some micronutrients that exist, or you can find them in herbal, but they are not at the levels that the plants need.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the calcium magnesium grower is one of the best commercial fertilizer to grow plant stocks in nurseries. It provides complete nutrition plus calcium and magnesium. In Australia, it's very important because we have soft water. So also, herbal doesn't have enough calcium and magnesium. So we haven't yet done the leaf tissue analysis. So once we get to that, I can answer all these questions about what happened during those stages of growth. Because it could be one of the micronutrients or the macronutrients that inhibited or restricted the growth of the herbal treatments.
Thanks.
Sean, you had your hand up.
Yeah, based on your characteristics of your fertilizer, so you mentioned about 875.
Hey, that can't be right.
That's what we got.
In fact, that's maybe we need to cross-check.
Yep.
Looks like it's impossible to get that
I-
level of.
I'll send you the
It's
Yeah.
almost
report.
like there's
I'll
no
send you the
water.
report.
Yeah, it's, that's why if you use this one in your, maybe you're saying pH is 3.3, then you give to your plant, then you have an osmotic, release there. So I'm not sure whether when you apply your fertilizer, you dilute with tap water or just use as it is, because too high concentration, osmotic pressure will suck your old water in
I
your
don't
plant.
know if it was tap water or if it was RO water that we.
Because
that
if
we
you mix
used
with
to
tap
dilute.
water, it will be pH will be neutralized, because relatively your
Yeah,
concentration
no, it
will be
didn't.
very low.
It didn't neutralize it. We spent a lot of time looking at that. And we were very surprised. Yeah, it didn't neutralize it at all.
Okay, we need to cross-check later
Yeah,
on.
and I'll send
Let's
you the
follow up
report. I'll
this
send you. We had it tested
Yeah.
outside. It wasn't just us doing the test because we were surprised by it. So I'll share that with you. Yeah. You had a question. Yes.
Yeah, question for Dana. I'm just wondering, in your plan, are you going to be searching for promising niches, market niches for this material? I'm just thinking about the fact that multiple people have commented on issues of scale. So are there places that would be the targets for uptake of this, given that we can't address all of broadacre? So who might be the right targets?
At this point, our project is slightly different to that. So we would be working, with Gary to identify who would be our target market, our niche, and that could be, home gardeners. It could be, tomato high-end horticulturists, whatever, and then start to ask the questions of what they currently use. So we're not starting with the Eurovale and Ugold products and looking for markets. We're actually sort of flipping that and starting, at that end. So it's a little bit different, I think, our project, to then see what it would take to design something for those specific markets. Yeah. Although there might be, who knows, it might be emergent, and there might be ways to see how we can weave Ugold and Eurovale into that discussion. And it's, certainly something we'll be discussing.
So this probably is my ignorance, but any of the experimentalists could answer this question. So what is your expectation? Do you expect that Eurovale and Ugold will perform better or as far as the commercial fertilizers, or slightly less that we're happy with? Like, do we have any prior expectations?
Well, I think that a conventional fertilizer is meeting all the plant needs. So anything that we start off with isn't going to. So that's why when I was looking at explaining my methodology, part of it is looking at formulations. One of the things that we've done previously, particularly in the biosolid side, was actually having a mix of organo-mineral fertilizers, which has complete has all the requirements. So certainly you wouldn't think that that's going to be the case. So part of the characterization, and I think that's where it's quite powerful to actually even, compare Ugold with Herbal, two different processes, see how they match, and determine then, well, what is it, how do we make those various formulations. So yeah, definitely you wouldn't, the expectation is that it's going to be as good, I think.
I think the best combination in the future is to include Herbal or any other urine-based fertilizer in a fertilizer program and a site or an agricultural land, and then see how it performs in a program, in a complete program. Because if you apply it solely, it's not going to give you the best results compared to the commercial one, because of the analysis that we know of. It's just the point of having that resource recovered and then reused inland, and then closing that cycle. That's most important for us. It's like, how can we reuse those nutrients without losing them into the ocean?
So one of the challenges with organic fertilizers, or conventional ones like compost or biosolids, is they're very slow release. And the ability to add a synthetic is that you've got a quick release to the plant, particularly in emergence, and then you've got that benefit. So it's just understanding, even when it becomes available and if it is available. So for instance, the biosolids derived biochar, a lot of the P is locked up. That's not available. And then you look at other ways that, okay, can you mine the P for something better than actually use on agriculture? So there's a lot of factors coming into play.
This is to all the experimental people. You've got your own research design, great randomized designs. I'm just thinking of, are there any auxiliary parameters that we could collect that could answer future questions? Like, I'm interested in when the medium to long-term use of those fertilizers on the microbiome, and so if we collect samples as we go, even if we store them, just extract the DNA, store it, it'll facilitate those further questions being explored that I can then model. But the chance to get this empirical data is so rare. It would be just great to collect auxiliary parameters if it's not too expensive. But we sort of need to know what parameters you're collecting, so we can say, could you add in X, Y, and Z? And I don't know how we can, what platform we can have to sort of say, and what any metadata that we could share.
And it's a two-way street, right? We need to know what types of samples,
Exactly.
or what types of things that you want to learn, and what samples we should collect, and how should we archive them.
Well,
Yes.
the same questions, Bernadette, you're asking about the heavy metals. It's all to do with the health risk sort of potential things. So if there's long-term threats to the resistome or microbiome, that they want to know.
I mean, the main thing I think which would help you in the modelling is to actually have a standardised approach to actually assessing. So while we're doing all the, that's where having a fertiliser replacement value in some ways can be a good start. That's why we always start off with that way. Because it's independent of the type of plant material or plant you're actually studying, soil types. You cut out that variability. Sort of perhaps the FRBs might be a good point for the standard approach.
Question for Leonard. With regard to the solid fertiliser you're using in your trial, was that a controlled release fertiliser or was it a straight compound, highly soluble fertiliser?
It's a slow release, but we got that from a dehydrator, a sort of a food waste dehydrator from the city. Organic. Yeah, are you referring to the organic one?
No, the 28% nitrogen one you were using.
The commercial one. It's a slow release one.
Release?
Yes, a slow release one. Yeah, that's the usual one that you're using in apartments.
So to your point, microplastics should be something you should be considering in that trial too, by capturing those microplastics as that material breaks down, because that's one of the big issues that will be, probably debated in the future when it comes to use of control these fertilisers in our environment. There's a big benefit, obviously, to urine-based fertilisers against control these fertilisers, even though they're great, in terms of labour. You're not using, you're only putting it out once or twice a year. You're putting out a lot of microplastics into the environment, so it'd be good to sort of start analysing for those sort of materials.
Sure, yeah, good consider.
How does one do that? How does one measure?
Good question.
Microplastics?
Microplastics, we've got measurement tools. I don't have, but so it is that special microscopy area.
Okay, yeah.
I think I don't want to hold that. Thanks, right? So I'm not a fertilizer guy, but my question is around looking at the product that comes straight out of Ergo or Ugold or any other source. Do you have a way of screening or getting a bit of a hunch about where the best application for that product might be before you do any sort of behavioural, fertilizer behavioural studies? I know they're important, but it's kind of a bit like a medicine. The pre-trial probability of most new medicines is tends to be fairly low. Just thinking is, it's a fairly vague, open-ended question, but what are your thoughts on that?
So in terms of, you're talking about the crop, or
where is that niche likely to be based on what you're seeing from the composition and what we know about other good fertilizers? Do you get any hunches about where the niche for that product might be?
Well, I think to start with it'd be a non-food, the turf, right? But I think that when you look for something, it's not so much the plant requirements, but rather your soil deficiencies. So, for instance, we had no idea that biosolids would be so brilliant, except that we were putting in the old red down the soil, which are phosphorus deficient. So you look for you've got your sandy soils. So really, that's what your niche will be, is more around what environment you're going to put it to, and it will behave differently. Whether you've got a turf out at Wilberforce, which is they've still got turf farms out there. They do. Versus, that's the thing, is that you'll have to start to change the fertiliser requirements based on your soil. It's not your plant that's going to be consistent all throughout, it's not the crop.
Well, can I make comments? Partly your soil, obviously, the sodium levels. From our perspective in the fertiliser game, I guess sodium. You look at plants that are not sensitive to sodium. And it's very interesting that you mentioned silica. Turf obviously is a great example of silica loving accumulating plants. So you look at, say, a turf that is not sensitive to sodium, like a zoysia or something, and loves silica. So there's a niche
It's a combination.
market straight away, like turf, zoysia turf, which is in both professional turf situations in golf courses, but also in home as well. Now there's a lot of zoysia being sold in the home situation. So that's an example of, but from Yates' perspective, you know, I think I presented this last year that in our weed and feed, we sell about 3 million litres of liquid weed and feed, and we use urea as the feed part. You could use urine as the feed part of your weed and feed. So there's another niche opportunity.
3 million in Australia?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there enough urine in Australia?
Start drinking water.
Once we scale up, we'll take all your urine.
Everyone hit the toilets one more time.
Get your coffee.
Any more questions?
Maybe then I can talk.
I was going to ask.
Service.
Does anyone want to ask Dana about her
Collaborative.
value proposition?
Thank you. So going back to the the notions behind circular economy, so we know it's obviously not just all about developing products and recycling. We need to think about the efficiency side and the demand side as well, and talking about service provision as well. So a couple of years ago, when we were working with stakeholders in the Sydney Basin, we came across a great partly like a fertiliser retailer in the Sydney Basin, and they had a really interesting model, which was based, they didn't realise, but it was based on service provision. So instead of selling their customers phosphate-based fertilisers, and their customers were asking for those fertilisers, they were like, no, the Sydney Basin is oversaturated in phosphorus. Let's test your soils. I'll show you. And then it's like they would rather sell an agronomic service to say, well, you're coming to me because you want to improve your yields or some kind of productivity on farm. So we'll sell you a service to show you how you can meet that goal, achieve that productivity without adding any more fertilisers. And so then it's a wonderful win-win, because then the customer, the farmer, gets those added yields or increased productivity. It's a really competitive business model for that particular business, because they're doing something different, and great environmental benefits. There's less phosphorus building up in our Sydney soils that can run off and pollute the Hawkesbury Nepean, for example. There's phosphate rock being mined. So it's just a really nice example, and there's probably many more out there. It was just one that we stumbled across that I thought was really good to illustrate this point that we can and should be thinking about service provision, and in the fertiliser sector doesn't just need to be thinking about that. So that's one of the transformations I think that can happen within the fertiliser sector, to think about service delivery alongside product delivery. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Any more questions? If not, so I've got written down future plans and closing remarks. Stefano. Thanks, everyone.
All right, what a day it has been. My job is to hold you back from the drinks. So it's been really good to see the progress. 1 year ago we met and we only had grand plans, and now we actually see things really happening, so that's very pleasing. What we liked, I just had a chat with Sean, is that we are seeing also collaborations really start happening. So, a few examples. We've seen UQ and Melbourne, we're gonna be working together on the greenhouse gas emissions. UTS and the Brisbane node will be giving fertilizer to both Jeff and Bernadette, and they're going to be doing different types of testing. And we are going to provide input for Syed, for example, for his project. So the expectation is there's going to be more and more interactions as we move forward, and that's really the whole point behind the hub, rather than working in silos. And it seems to me we're not working in silos, so that's a good recipe for success. And so as we move forward, it'd be nice to see how all the pieces of work that we generate are going to be collaborative. So with authors from different institutions, including different industry partners. So Sean mentioned this morning,
What we're going for is value chains, people and policies, technology and innovation. I think we've covered all of that. And so we have really something to look forward to. Before the drinks, we just want to raise again your awareness on two opportunities that there are for contribute or sharing our knowledge with the broader industry and the public. One is Oswater 24, which we already mentioned. We have decided during one of the breaks we're going to put in an application for a workshop. So we'll do that. If that comes through, we'll be contacting several of you for your potential participation there. Obviously, if you're planning to come to Oswater. But that will be really providing a unmatched visibility for the NiCE hub in front of the whole water industry of the country. So that would be a very nice opportunity. And the other one, coming back to the first speaker of the day, Abraham has the yearly Rich Earth Institute summit coming up. You would like to finish off to
Sure. Thank you. Yeah.
say a couple of words?
Yeah, thank you. It's November 7 through 9 this year, and there's for full virtual participation. It's in an awkward time zone, but there are recordings, and there are parts of it that won't be so horrible in time. And I would love people to attend if you can, and also think about submitting for next year. I've been so inspired by what I've been hearing today, and there are so many opportunities for information sharing or even collaboration. So I hope we can have a strong connection between NiCE Hub and all the folks who congregate at the Rich Earth Summit and us at Rich Earth also. So please consider attending, and you can email me or just search Rich Earth Summit for more information on that. Thank you.
All right, so the last thing to be done is get as many fluids as you can into your body, and don't forget to visit the toilets, to leave a donation for Sean. This will all turn into Urval. For you good, come and visit us next year at Victoria Park, beautiful location in Brisbane, and leave your present there as well. All right, so now we're just going to have a little bit of networking and social time, and Sean said that we might have an opportunity to visit the basement.
Yeah.
So all of this in the coming hour. Enjoy. Thank you.
Liquid fertilizer better than the overlay.
I think in Victoria Park, the slow release commercial looks like
Turn off by yourself. You're in the movie.